And good afternoon. And for those of you not in Pittsburgh, I will report, because I always do a weather report, that we've had a very beautiful week this week. Really pleasant. Nice to be out there. It's supposed to snow again tomorrow. I don't know. When spring is here, can winter be far behind? I think I've said that before, and you'll probably hear me say it a lot again. But anyway, such is life. The weather is very, very topsy-turvy. Welcome. I hope you're all out there. Say hello if you are. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for tuning into that. And I hope you're telling all your friends to subscribe to YouTube because, as I keep on saying, it does help us considerably. The more people who subscribe, the better we get. Hello, David. Great to be back. Great to see you back. Great to have you back, David. For those who don't know, is across the pond and a loyal supporter. That's the other thing I'd love you to do. We're really very proud of the fact that the outreach has been so considerable, and we're now going into our third year of webinars, which I find very hard to believe. And they're all on YouTube, and much better on YouTube now that we're using this particular platform. You can see it almost immediately after the broadcast. So apart from asking you, of course, to make a donation, I would ask you, if you are watching on YouTube and you don't normally tune in live, that's okay. But tell your friends about us. If you think that there's any benefit to watching these things, and obviously if you do watch them regularly, then you do get something out of them, do spread the word, because regardless of the fact that we want the word spread in the Pittsburgh region, we'd like the word spread elsewhere as well. We'd like our outreach to be much further than simply Pittsburgh. And we do have viewers in Australia, we have viewers in Europe, we have viewers in India, and we have viewers all across the United States. But the more the merrier. Please, just spread the word for us and subscribe to YouTube. You did see that little note about the donations. I will be saying it again. Hello, Grace. And hello, Rebecca. We want to know, we would like you to donate, obviously, because it's your donations that put the plays on the stage. Such things like the webinars and what have you, we're very fortunate we get sponsorships for, but we do need the donations. The more donations we have, the more we can put onto the stage, and putting on the kind of plays we do, which is basically classic plays, tend to have large casts, so we need more money. You can't do plays without money, sadly. So please do consider any donation. Every single dollar counts, or dollar, or euro, or zloty, or whatever you happen to have in your own currency. Even a small donation matters, and you can donate via the website, and we'll keep putting that up so that you don't forget it. Hello, John Henry. Welcome to you from Indiana, PA. Yet again, a word of thanks to the Allegheny Foundation. They are the ones who are supporting us with an annual grant, again, to cover the cost of these webinars. They do cost money to produce. We don't get paid, but you have to pay for the platform that we're on, and we do include various artists from time to time. There will be some next week. And they do get paid. And so we do have to raise the money to pay for the website. Fortunately, the very, very kind people at Allegheny Foundation are sponsoring us for yet another year. So I can think of a lot of other things that you might be interested in sponsoring, including the productions. So more about that at the end of this week's webinar. How are we doing time-wise? Oh, we're nearly there. We always allow the extra minute for parking and what my dear friends in California described to me once, and I still love it, as a bio break. So while people are having their quick bio break, the one final point, that is Endgame, our next production. Samuel Beckett's amazing play will be from May 12th to 28th. It's a very limited run. There is very limited seating because of the way we're staging it. If you're in the Pittsburgh region, please think about booking now. I hate it when people say, oh, I would love to have seen it, but I forgot, or I would love to have seen it, but it was booked out. So please start thinking about booking it right now. You can do that on the website. Go to the website, click on Endgame, click on book tickets, and we'd be delighted to facilitate you. It's also got 4 of the most popular picked performers in it. We have Martin Giles, James Fitzgerald, Ken Bolden, and the inimitable Karen Baum. So please, please, please think about booking now. I don't want you to be disappointed. So let's think about this week. What are we going to talk about this week? Well, I come back to my favorite. We come back to Shakespeare, and I've basically called this Shakespeare and the Psychological Thriller. Now, it's a very strange combination of definitions there, Shakespeare and the psychological thriller. We don't sort of often think about Shakespeare in those terms. So I'm going to preface everything I say today by saying, my usual, everything I tell you may be wrong, and B, this is a theory which is mine. So if you want to dispute with me or ask questions at any time, pump them in, and we'll try to get any questions that come in on the screen so that I can respond to them. But this is a theory, and it's a theory about writing. And I've talked a lot about writing this year. We did a whole sequence on where it came from, which is fundamentally Greek theatre as we understand it, and the principle of storytelling. And one of the principles of good storytelling is to create, and I'm going to use the word very precisely, a thrill, an excitation, a making the heart beat a little faster, or getting the brain a little bit confused. That's the principle of the thriller. Now, it's been cheapened somewhat of late by Hollywood, the notion that a thriller has to be all blood and guts and gore and what have you. But it's much cleverer than that. It is this thrill of expectation. And that thrill of expectation comes from the basic principle of what happens next, or how do they get out of this? When I was a kid and we used to go to Saturday morning cinema for children and things, there'd always be what we used to call the follow-up, the series. It would be a Western or a science fiction thing. And always at the end of that week's episode, the hero would be in a situation that seemed impossible to escape from. And that was the thrill. What happens next? It was the thing to drive us back to see the movie next week, to see what would happen, how they would get out of it. In theatrical terms, we call it the cliffhanger, for obvious reasons. If your hero is hanging off a cliff with no other way to get out of it, that's thrilling. Usually it followed, with that well-known theatrical phrase, and with one bound he was free. Usually it was nonsense, but the principle behind it was you put the audience in a state of confused expectation. What's going to happen next? Or how the hell are they going to get out of this situation? Or how can this problem possibly be resolved? Now, Shakespeare, possibly, probably, in my mind, certainly, the greatest playwright ever. Within the range of his plays seems to cover the whole of human experience. There are very few things that can happen in human experience that isn't covered by Shakespeare. He seemed to understand the totality of, or have a perception of the totality of the whole human experience. And so specifically that they are still relevant and pertinent today. He was a master of tragedy. He was a master of comedy. And more importantly for this discussion, he was a master of suspense. So I want to look or question or debate, if you like, Shakespeare as a master of psychological tension. And that's why I use the term thriller, because it's in terms of thriller that we understand that. So I'm not suggesting that Shakespeare would have written a James Bond movie. What I'm suggesting is a James Bond movie can be equated to a lot of the themes that Shakespeare covered. In terms of that, Shakespeare is equal to and possibly better than many a modern writer. When he wrote a play, he had all the elements in it. Now, you've heard me say before, that his tragedies are full of comedy. His comedies very often start with a tragic theme. And his plays very often contain mysterious elements, or elements of how the hell does this happen, or how do they get out of this? There is the story, I think it was Thornton Wilder. My aging brain isn't quite sure, but I'm absolutely convinced it was Thornton Wilder, who wrote about the old lady on a train journey, and she bought a book to read, and she thought it was a thriller, and she was so excited reading it because it was a thriller, and what she was reading was Macbeth. And for somebody with no knowledge of Shakespeare at all to take up a play like Macbeth and get the fact that it's a thriller is wonderful, and a testament to Shakespeare's skill as a writer. If you look at the setup of that play, the setup of the plot, first, a prophecy that this guy Macbeth will become king. Wonderful. Followed immediately by a prophecy that his best mate won't be king, but that his descendants will be. Now, if Macbeth is going to be king, how can the descendants of Banquo become kings? And there you have the first element of the thriller. How does that happen? How can that happen? Shakespeare's setting up right at the beginning a conflict. Two impossible conditions. That Macbeth will become king, which is impossible because there are two other heirs to the throne, and that Banquo's kids will become kings. Followed later on by two more impossible conditions, and these are the famous ones. The fact that once Macbeth is king, he cannot be killed because no man born of woman can harm him. He cannot be defeated until an entire forest moves to his castle, till Birnam Wood become to Dunsinane. As Viola says in Twelfth Night, how will this fadge? And we'll come more about her later. Shakespeare, in that sense, has set up the audience with a conundrum. How can Macbeth be defeated? Under the terms of the prophecy. The prophecy says no man born of woman can kill him. The prophecy says he cannot be defeated till Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane. And as he says himself, all men are born of women, and how can a forest uproot itself and move? It's not possible. So Shakespeare has set up this thriller principle of the conundrum. And our job, as with all these adventure stories, how do they work it out? It's creating the thrill of expectation and the thrill of confusion and the fear that it may not happen, that the prophecies may be wrong. It's a very old trick. It's like the sleight of hand of the card sharp. It's misdirection. Because when any writer sets up such a proposition, he's forcing your focus onto the proposition. A proposition that is impossible to resolve if you just look at the proposition. If you think about the proposition, you may solve it, but we don't. We always just look at the proposition. We think of the conditions in the way that Macbeth thinks about them. We don't think of the obvious. We only think about the impossibility. We have established in our minds, this is an impossible situation. Just like the cowboy hanging off the cliff at the end of the episode. How will he get out? Just like, Batman in the old TV series, in this impossible situation, hanging from the rafters with Robin. How do they get out of it? We don't look at the obvious, we look at the problem. We only think about the impossibility. We think like Macbeth does. What we don't think about is caesarean delivery. That Macduff wasn't born of his mother, but from his mother's womb untimely ripped. Suddenly we go, oh, for God's sake, that's so obvious. Well, it's not. It's not obvious because we haven't been looking at the obvious. We've been looking at the impossible proposition. When Malcolm says to his soldiers, chop down the branches of the trees and carry them before you towards Dunsinane, we go, oh, yeah. Why didn't I see that? Because you weren't looking for it. You were looking for the prospect of an entire forest uprooting itself and marching like a whole gang of Triffids towards the castle. He says Burnham Wood. The wood was moving. It had been disconnected from the trunks of the trees, but it was the wood and it was moving. So again, here we have tension, a thrill of expectation raised by the impossible propositions. And because our tension, our thrill level, if you like, has been raised by these impossible conditions, we miss the obvious. And when the obvious happens, A, we're annoyed with ourselves, and B, there is an enormous sense of relief. The thrill, the excitement has been quenched by the result. This still happens in modern cinema. I mean, one of the most famous lines, I think, in any of the James Bond movies, I mentioned James Bond earlier, is in Goldfinger when Bond is strapped to a table of gold and a laser is working its way slowly up, obviously for the thrill of it, between his legs. And Bond asks the question or makes the statement, "Do you expect me to talk?" And Goldfinger replies, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." And he will. How can this not happen? And that's that same effect, exactly that same effect, as Burnham Wood coming to Dunsinane and Man Born of Woman. If you know the Lord of the Rings trilogy, if you've watched the movies, you'll know in that final thing when the head of the Nazgul is about to kill King Theoden, and a woman steps in and he says, "I cannot be killed by any man." And she takes off the helmet and says, "I'm not a man," and kills him. It's exactly that same motif being used again and again and again. And it is the magician's sleight of hand, the misdirection, the making you think of something as being impossible, showing its impossibility, and then giving that solution that actually makes it not impossible, but incredibly obvious. And usually the obvious is based on a very simple principle. And it was, in fact, Conan Doyle put it into the mouth of Sherlock Holmes. It's based entirely on the principle that when you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And that's exactly it. You set up an impossible conundrum. When you remove the impossible aspects of the solution, whatever remains, no matter how improbable it might be, that's the answer, that's the truth. Conan Doyle owes quite a lot to Shakespeare. Now, I want to move on. I'm not going to give every example from every play or anything, because as I say, this is just my theory. It's just a thought I have when I'm looking at plays, because as an actor or a director, you have a multitude of thoughts when you're reacting to a script. And in order to avoid the obvious or a simplistic view of it, it's always wise to ask every question possible. And one of the questions I try to ask myself is, for instance, if we are doing a comedy, where's the tragedy? If we're doing a tragedy, where's the comedy? And if we're doing any play, where's the thrill? Where's the tension? Where's the excitement? Where is that psychological tension that he tries to build in any given moment? And it's in one of the history plays that I think we get one of the great examples that we see in modern day politics all the time. Richard III is the play that I'm referring to. But almost all of Shakespeare's history plays, I've often said, might better be described as his political plays. All the wars that are fought in these plays, and there are many, all of them are politically motivated. It's not heroic war. It's not King Arthur riding out against Mordred. This is politics, and it's the politics of power. So what Shakespeare was truly examining was power politics. His more successful kings, and all of them failed in the end, but his more successful kings tended to be smart at politics. His failure kings tended not to be. Richard II in his play tended not to be. Edward IV tended not to be, whereas his younger brother, Richard of Gloucester, tended to be very smart at politics. And one point you must always remember with regard to these plays, Shakespeare always drew on historical records and historical documents and accepted historical fact when writing these plays, and used Holinshed, used Plutarch, used various other historians to get the sequence of historical fact. However, when actually writing the plays, he did not stick to historical facts. He worked to the old Irish proverb principle of never spoil a good story by telling the truth. And this is probably true of Richard III. Richard III is generally accepted now by historians to have been the rightful king, that his brother's children were probably illegitimate and had no claim to the throne. He was appointed Lord Protector. He's always condemned as having murdered the famous princes in the Tower, although they were just as equally likely had been killed by his successor, who was Henry IV, to get them out of the way politically. But Shakespeare took a series of these historical events and twisted them in order to write a play about a manipulative king. In other words, his Richard III, while not historically accurate, his Richard III was a play about a despot, a play about a political genius, a play about a manipulator of minds in order to become king. It's all about the struggle for power, and it's as true today as it ever was. Now, my particular Bible, when it comes to dozens and dozens of books about Shakespeare, but my particular favorite, and the one I constantly turn to, is Jan Kot, who was a Polish Shakespeare scholar, wrote a remarkable book called Shakespeare, Our Contemporary. I recommend it to all. And he describes the mechanics of power that Shakespeare enumerated, if you like, quite brilliantly. He calls it the grand mechanism. And one of the allusions in that is this notion of the great staircase. And if you imagine that there's a staircase in front of you, and at the top of the staircase, sitting on a throne on a purple cushion, is a king looking down on you. And you must climb that staircase. And on the way up, you may have to bribe, murder, destroy, whatever, anything that gets in your way with one single specific thought in mind. But when you get to the top, you're going to take that guy off the throne, kill him, or have him killed, and sit down on that purple cushion yourself. But at the moment you sit down on that purple cushion and look back down the staircase, you see somebody else coming up for you. And that's the mechanism of the whole cycle of history plays that Shakespeare wrote. And it is the whole cycle of despotism throughout the ages. I'll come to that in a moment. Shakespeare uses so many devices in his plays. Often there is love, often there is murder, but Always there's a plot twist, the unexpected moment. And the unexpected moments happen in unexpected places and in unexpected ways. Even when we know a device is being worked, like the cross-dressing in As You Like It in Twelfth Night, we're always surprised, for some reason, by the outcome of the story. We know that in the comedies, we know the plot, we know what's happening, we know who's who, we know who's in disguise, and still we get surprised by the outcome. Now, in Richard III, there's plenty of killing. Lots of it. People killed at ferocious levels. Much smiting, one might say. But it's the psychology of control and fear that Richard himself excels at. And the games he plays keep us guessing what the next move may be. And he does that, as a writer, by having the characters in the play constantly trying to guess what Richard's next move may be, both his friends and his enemies. Now, his enemies are fine because they know they're his enemies. His friends are in a much more dangerous situation because they may be friendly with him, but they're not absolutely certain he's friendly with them. And that's the power of the despot, to keep everyone guessing. And Shakespeare understood this quite brilliantly. And in one particular scene, this wonderful scene, Shakespeare shows us that skill as a writer. This is a thriller. This is thrilling in its context, in its content, and in the excitement. And I mean that again in the pure sense of that word, excitement that it builds, both in the characters on stage and in the audience watching. If you've been paying attention, you're really in the middle of this scene. And this motif has been repeated down the years in theatre, in literature. Shakespeare didn't think it up. He just used it better than most. A meeting has been called. Now, you can use that phrase when you talk about Sophocles' Oedipus. A meeting has been called. A man has come out of the desert with information about the death of the previous king. Anybody with any sense at all would ignore the meeting and have the guy thrown out. Oedipus doesn't. Tension has occurred. Nobody knows what happened to the previous king, except that he was killed. Suddenly a man comes with information. Tension straight away. Thriller. In the case of Richard III, a meeting has been called. The most powerful men in the kingdom are waiting for Richard to arrive. They've been summoned there in the middle of the night. They've been woken and told to come to a meeting with Richard. He is the Lord Protector. He's not king yet, but he is the Lord Protector. He is the boss. He is the big boss. All the bosses are there, but he is the big boss. No one knows why the meeting has been called. No one wants to do anything or say anything without his authority. And no one knows what he is thinking. So what have you got there? Absolute tension. The most powerful men in the kingdom sitting there waiting for the guy to come in and tell them why they're there. It sounds stupid, but that's the way it works. This is Stalin. This is, if you remember it, again, I come back to my James Bond image because I love James Bond. This is the meeting of all the guys in Spectre. And one of them is going to die, but nobody knows which one it is. And when one of them does die, nobody says a word. That's power. That is real power. And it excites us. So we're back in the room. Richard has arrived, they're waiting for Richard to arrive. And each of them in the room considers what the possibilities might be. What should they be doing? What have they not done? What have they failed to do? What? But no one wants to make any decision or offer any opinion without Richard's authority. And in the midst of this tension, suddenly, Richard walks into the room. Up goes the tension level, the thrill level. What's he going to say? They are so tense with expectation. What will he say? And he looks at them, and he turns to the Bishop of Ely, and he says, last time I was in your house, I noticed you had some lovely strawberries in your garden. Would you mind sending for some for me? And the bishop says, yeah, fine. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, now. And Richard says, thanks, and walks back out of the room. The tension level, instead of relaxing, has now doubled. What was that about? Why were we here? Why were we called? There must be something. It can't just be strawberries. So these all-powerful lords are now utterly and completely confused. And how do you manage to rule things? If you're a despot, keep everybody else confused. Never let them know what you're thinking. Always keep them worried about what it might be. Suddenly, they have nothing to say. They do not know where to go. They then start to grasp at straws. They ask each other, what do you think he was thinking? Did you see anything in his face that might indicate what he was thinking? And you suddenly see these incredibly powerful men reduced to the level of basically gibbering idiots. They are frightened because they're frightened about something that we are always frightened of. What we don't know. This is thriller time. The Lord Hastings tries to convince himself and all the others, because Lord Hastings believes himself to be a noble and honourable man. So he tries to convince himself and the others that Richard is not offended by anybody in the room, that they are fine, because if Richard were offended by any of them, they wouldn't be in the room. And they all begin to think, yeah, maybe right, yeah, okay. Suddenly Richard comes back. And we, the audience, are now as tense and apprehensive as the people in the room. Why? Because Shakespeare has done that wonderful sleight of hand. That on Richard's first entrance, when we thought something terrible was going to be announced, he asked for strawberries and left. We don't know what to think. We don't know where to turn. And when I say we, I mean we, because Shakespeare has made us, the audience, part of that group in the room, waiting. We are now all waiting for what Richard may say. And when he comes back, he asks a very simple and a very dangerous question. And I quote, I pray you all, tell me what they deserve that do conspire my death with devilish plots of damned witchcraft, that have prevailed upon my body with their hellish charms. Oh, dangerous. Dangerous. It's a very simple question and a very dangerous answer. And it's brilliant, because that's the first thing he says to them, apart from, would you get me some strawberries? What should I do to somebody who has practiced witchcraft against me and turned me into the cripple that I am? Hastings, the man who has convinced them all that they have nothing to fear from Richard, because nobody in the room has anything to fear, or they wouldn't be in the room. Hastings does the very foolish thing. He answers the question, as any decent, loyal person would. And I quote, the tender love I bear your grace, my lord, makes me most favoured in this noble presence to doom the offenders. Whosoever they be, I say, my lord, they have deserved death. Which is the right answer and the wrong answer. And we, as participants in this moment of tension, in this thriller moment, we as participants might agree with Hastings, but if we did, we'd be very foolish to admit it, because Hastings has just signed his death warrant. Hastings is guilty of nothing in this case. Richard just wants rid of him. And Richard immediately speaks of how he has been bewitched and crippled and withered by witchcraft caused by the late King Edward's wife. Now, we know this is rubbish. Right at the beginning of the play, he admits he's already a hunchback. He's got a withered arm. He's got a limp. He is crippled. He was crippled from birth. But he is now rewriting history, rewriting the facts to suit his own agenda. Does this sound familiar? He then says all of these ailments that he suffers from are caused by witchcraft, which was brought on by the late King Edward's wife, his sister-in-law. Hastings, without batting an eyelid and not realizing what he was doing, I quote, "If they have done this thing, my gracious lord," and Richard pounces, "if thou, protector of this damned strumpet, talkest thou to me of ifs, thou art a traitor, off with his head. Now, by St. Paul, I swear I will not dine until I see the same," and Hastings is dragged out. And that's what it was all about. A way of getting rid of somebody he didn't have use for anymore, who didn't quite trust anymore, and he gets rid of him by rewriting the facts of his birth, creating a lie about witchcraft, and getting the victim to condemn himself. It is brilliant writing. No one in the room, including the audience, expected that. But the tension that it generates, if you like, you don't expect it to be in the room with you. You may be frightened of something, you may be nervous of something, but you don't expect to find it in the room. If you want another modern illusion, it's a bit like Jamie Lee Curtis when she's told, "He's in the house." Fear of the unknown, fear of the unexpected, knowing that something is amiss, something is about to happen, but not knowing what and not knowing where, raises the tension level so much. Thrilling in its purest sense. Now, you may not quite recognize it, and maybe you will, but in its essence, that particular scene from Richard III is every interrogation scene led by or caused by a despot, and using all the elements of a psychological thriller. If you think back to all those movies that you may have watched in which that kind of scene happens, the good cop, bad cop principle, the leaving of the interrogee on their own for a long period of time before the interrogator arrives. All of this is exactly that same motif that Shakespeare is using, that Shakespeare, to my mind, perfected. As I say, it's not new for Shakespeare. It's not original of Shakespeare. Nothing was ever original. But he perfected it, and he drew it so perfectly in that one scene. It's quite remarkable. It's quite exciting. He used that same motif again in the play Henry V. Before Henry goes off to France to fight his war, there's a moment when he has discovered two traitors. And exactly that same motif happens. The two traitors are in the room. And he asks of them, because there was another guy accused of some crime that was meant to be executed. And Henry says, "I think we'll pardon him." And these two guys say, "No, you can't pardon him. If you pardon him, it'll just encourage other people to act the same way." And he says, No, I think I'll pardon him. They say, No, you should execute him. And he says, "No, I'm going to let them off. I'm going to let him off. By the way, here are your commissions for the war." And he hands them both to a document each, and they read the document and realize it's a whole list of accusations and proofs against their treason. And he says, "What should I do with you? Should I pardon you, or should I do what you suggested with regard to the other guy?" And of course, he has them executed. But it's that same technique, that same motif. And we know that two people in that room are guilty because it's been discussed, but we have not been told necessarily who. So that's that thriller aspect of it, that raising an expectation of something about to happen, but we don't know quite what. This is how despotic dictatorship works. One wonders how much in the 1930s that happened in Berlin. One wonders whether it's still happening in Moscow. But it's that same basic principle. Keep the others guessing. Tell lies where necessary. We are not going to invade your country. And then you invade their country. Let's take a look at Iago, who is the nemesis of the much confused Othello. Now, again, Shakespeare quite brilliantly plays the game of misdirection. Iago, almost from the very beginning, tells us what he thinks, what he feels. Right at the beginning, to Rodrigo, I hate them all. Says it quite blatantly. And yet, Shakespeare creates a character who is undoubtedly the best liked and most trusted character in the play. And just like Richard III, as the play progresses, we, the audience, come to like him. Maybe like is too strong a word, but certainly admire him. He may be a villain, and that's exactly how Shakespeare listed him. Only in the whole gamut of Shakespeare, only twice does he describe a character only as a villain. One is Iago, the other is Aaron the Moor in Titus Andronicus. But what we see, what we are shown by Iago, and therefore by Shakespeare, is a rather charming, smiling, delightful rogue. That's what we see, whom everybody trusts. Desdemona most of all. When Desdemona is at her bleakest moment, who does she turn to for advice and consolation? The villain, Iago. It is the villain, Iago, whom Shakespeare has set up as our card sharp, doing the misdirection all the time. And as he misdirects the characters, we fall into that trap of being misdirected by him as well. And as he maneuvers Othello to his doom, Shakespeare constantly has Iago thinking one step ahead of every eventuality. Every time a problem is put in his way, Iago has a solution. Every time an impossible situation happens, Iago has a solution. Rodrigo makes the very foolish mistake of saying that he will go and tell Desdemona everything. He has just signed his own death warrant because Iago will have him killed. He won't kill him himself. He'll have Cassio do it because then he can kill Cassio. It's a brilliant piece of sleight of hand maneuvering all the way through, and it's exciting. And again, I use the word in its very pure sense. It's exciting our imagination. It is making us say, how do you get out of this? How do you resolve that? Oh my God, he's done that. Well, how does he solve that one? Oh my God, that's what he did. All the way through. This constant setting up of a moment of tension, of excitement, and then resolving it in a way we didn't necessarily expect. Sleight of hand. And Iago using whatever means come to hand. For instance, this we know, Cassio has said, I don't drink, it doesn't suit me. He's basically admitting to being alcoholic. So Iago tricks him into drinking too much. Shakespeare uses the sleight of hand of wine drinking to put Cassio into a vulnerable position. Otherwise, that fight would never have taken place, and Cassio would never have been demoted, and the play wouldn't have taken the course it did. A missing handkerchief. Iago didn't steal it. His wife found it, gave it to him. Oh, I'll give it back. No, yes, he does, but in a different way. And each of these tricks, each of these sleight of hand tricks, are done to give us an expectation of what might happen next. that we can't see a solution to. Each of these, a mechanism to provide a plot twist, each of them giving us an opportunity to ask questions for which we do not have the answers. And that's the point of a thriller. To constantly set up questions and propositions that we can't see a solution to. And that keeps us excited. And our excitement keeps us focused. And it is a brilliant technique of playwriting. One of the most grotesque moments in the whole of Shakespeare comes into the play Titus Andronicus. Now, Titus Andronicus might possibly described as the most grotesque play that Shakespeare wrote. I love it. But it is a play full of blood and death and rape and just about everything rotten that can happen. It's, I would say, definitely Shakespeare's most grotesque creation. But in terms of thriller writing, it's quite remarkable, because all the way through that play, you don't know what's going to happen next. Prospero's daughter, out walking one day, sees the two young men that she's slightly frightened of and think, what's going to happen next? Well, nothing too bad, and then they rape her. And if you think that's bad enough, they go a step further. They cut out her tongue and chop off her hands. Now, you might say, all right, that's a little bit over the top. But no, it's there to set up a proposition. How can she possibly tell her father who did this if she can't speak and she can't write? How does that solve itself? It solves itself that between the stumps of her hand, she can hold a stick and write in the sand. The impossible solved by the unexpected. Same principle. How will he get his revenge? Well, the new queen, the mother of these obnoxious sons, has now got more power than Titus has, now got more authority than Titus has. She has won. So the final confrontation between her and Titus is one of the most brilliant moments in the whole genre. He invites her to dinner, which looks like an admittance of defeat. She and the emperor, or her new husband, are there sitting at the table having dinner. What can possibly happen? She's enjoying being there. How is he going to get his revenge out of this? She's glorying in her success over him. She's enjoying the deals of food. It's wonderful. She thinks it's great. She's having a great time because she thinks she has won, and so do we. But Shakespeare wants to build the tension, the thrill of expectation. For those who don't know the play, it's utterly brilliant. For those who do know the play, it never ceases to shock. This thrill of expectation. There she is, eating the pie. And her sons have been baked into the pie. She has eaten her own children. It is a completely unexpected outcome within the context of the structure. It is thrilling to watch. You know, I've seen this play 4 or 5 times in different productions and different interpretations and presentations, but that scene never fails to shock and to thrill, knowing that you're about to witness a mother discovering that she has just eaten her own children. That's the thriller motif. And it doesn't, as a motif, have to be just contained in tragedies and histories. Comedies have their moments too. Impossible situations can be created within a comedic structure just as they can within a tragic or historic or political structure. After all, Midsummer Night's Dream is riddled with thriller moments. To begin with, like all good comedies, it starts with the potential for tragedy. A father has threatened his daughter with death if she doesn't marry the man of his choosing. She decides to escape with the man of her choosing. And her best friend, who likes the other guy, decides to follow her and betray her. And as Sherlock Holmes might have put it, the game's afoot. So as with all Shakespeare's comedies, beginning with a potential for tragedy, then enter the unexpected. And the unexpected in this case are not merely unexpected, but unseen. The fairies. And no one saw that coming. At least none of the protagonists. No, at least the protagonists in the main plot, or indeed the protagonists in the subplot, the rude mechanicals rehearsing a play for the Duke. So, seeing from an invisibility all of this situation, he recognizes that one man should be in love with the other woman, not the woman that the father told him to marry. And in a vain attempt, and vanity, by the way, vanity is all around us in this play, the world of fairy intervenes and makes mistakes. And there's the tension rising straight away. There's the thriller aspect of it. Because the lovers don't know who they love anymore. They're all in love with the wrong person. They don't particularly seem to care either, because fate has intervened, magic has intervened, and everything has gone topsy-turvy. They literally change partners. So you have this world of confusion, and, again, to quote Viola, how will this fadge? The inevitable confusion seems impossible to solve. You have all the bones of a thriller, including a comic hero who's grown an ass's head. And of course it is resolved. It's resolved by magic. It's resolved in a way that the human protagonist cannot understand. They've been living in a world of total confusion. We've been watching it, and we've been excited, again, pure sense of the word, by the proposition that's been put forward. One of the rules of comedy is that it gives us an opportunity to laugh at situations we would dread to be in ourselves. I've said this before, and I will say it again. A tragedy or a farce is a tragedy happening to someone else, and a farce is a tragedy, or a tragedy is a farce happening to you. I always get that mixed up and wrong way around. You get my point. These are situations we would dread to be in. When we laugh at someone slipping on the banana skin, it's funny, but if it happens to us, it's not. That's the way this excitement and this tension builds up. And in comedy, we can view it with the reasonably certain knowledge that it's all going to turn out all right in the end. And in a tragedy or one of the political plays, we can view it knowingly. The thriller motifs when we cannot find a way to get out of such a situation. We see the situation, we see the evidence, we see the problem, we don't see the way out. Let me go back to Macbeth, that situation. He cannot be killed by man of woman born, he cannot be defeated until Birnam Wood come to Dunsinane, and we can't see how that happens until it does. Shakespeare takes delight in setting up these impossible conundrums and confusions and then resolving them in unexpected ways. He will set up the cliffhanger, he will set up our excitement, and then resolve it in a way we did not expect. Even in The Tempest, Prospero uses magic and the power over a not too very friendly sprite. Everybody, don't think Ariel is a nice person. Ariel is not a nice person. But he's got power over not just the elements, but the very behavior of the people around him. And Shakespeare allows us to be uncertain of the outcome. How is this going to work itself out? And yet manages to bring us to a happy conclusion to a degree by having Prospero give up, actually surrender the very power that he delights in, which is his magic. But the proposition within the play, The Tempest, is one constantly of what is going to happen next. So how could Twelfth Night be described as a thriller? Well, it isn't, basically. None of the plays are actually thrillers. They contain, as I said at the beginning, the thrill motif. And Shakespeare uses it as a tool, way of giving the audience the excitement of how do they get out of this. And in the play Twelfth Night, for instance, aside from the potentially tragic opening, and within all the comedy of cross-dressing, lovelorn heroine, confusion about twins, Olivia marrying the wrong twin, but then saying, that's okay. There is also a very insidious plot to discredit and shame a somewhat despotic servant of Olivia. And Malvolio is indeed an arrogant fool. But the plot leads him to his incarceration in a madhouse. And the plot that they use has all the twists and turns of a thriller. Will they get away with this? Will this happen? Will somebody get hurt? Will somebody get injured? It's exactly that. It's not as precise and clear as, say, in Macbeth or Richard III, but it's still that same thrill motif, that same mechanism of the thriller used to excite our imaginations and to keep us asking questions. And it has all the marks. Just as Othello with the too much wine and the handkerchief, you have the hallmarks again. You have pieces of evidence, a forged letter, misleading instructions, all of that kind of things. So basically, and I'm coming to the end, as I said, this is just me. This is one of the ways I would look at a play when considering what is the mechanism for staging. How do you talk to the actors? What are you looking for when you examine the text? And what in that text relates to natural human behavior? And this notion, and I spring back because it's my strong suit on this one. I spring back to that scene in Richard III, which I think is so remarkable and so realistic, and has probably been replayed one way or another by despotic rulers down the ages. This sleight of hand, this confusion, this game, this trick of putting forward a proposition and leaving you confused as an audience as to what the outcome may be. It happens in life all the time. And Shakespeare, as I said right at the beginning, seemed to have a fundamental understanding of the human condition that he could write about this and still be true 400 years later. So, read the plays, look for the clues, and try to find the answers to those clues in your own imagination. How would you get out of that situation? How would you resolve that conundrum? Because that's what we have to do. Hello, Paul. To me, the Scottish play is an example of play where the intensity, I must bear with me a sec, of the experience is not something reached at the climax, but only from the very first moment we, the audience, feel thrills. That's a good personal opinion. I don't entirely agree with you, but from the very first moment, we, the audience, feel the thrills. And I think you're right. I think it does come to a perfect climax. But I think you're right in the fact, for the very point that I'm saying, that right from the very beginning, an excitement of expectations begun. Rather brilliantly, he opens the play with the bleeding sergeant, talking about Macbeth's skills and how Macbeth was, as a soldier, in an impossible situation. And yet faced the opposition by literally hacking his way impossibly through a whole pack of soldiers till he got up to MacDonald and unseamed him from the nave to the chops. You have it, yes, in that sense, right from the very beginning, he's setting up an impossible situation from his hero, or for his hero. and letting his hero solve that with almost superhuman skill and ability. He set up a superhero, and we admire, and then turn that superhero into a despotic megalomaniac villain. But yes, that excitement, I agree with you, not entirely, but to a large degree. Yeah. So that's it for this week. Next week, I'm hoping, I'm hoping that we will have a small celebration of poetry, and to celebrate the fact that it's Poetry Month. So there'll be more about that going out on the website in the next 2 or 3 days. Thank you, David. Thank you very much. More information on that in the next 2 or 3 days. Thank you, Grace. And then after that, we may be coming back to my favorite playwright. But for next week, I think it's going to be about poetry and women in particular. Just a quick reminder, Endgame opens May 12th. Do book now. Very limited seating, very limited run. I don't want anybody to miss it. There you are. Tickets and information at pittheatre.org. Please, please, please spread the word, not just about the webinars, but about Picked. YouTube channel, please subscribe. Please tell your friends about it. Get your friends to join us. Please, please, please consider making a donation. We are currently launching our spring appeal. It is your donations that pay for the productions. That's what we use your money for, to put plays on the stage, to put actors on the stage, to bring you what we think is some of the best theatre you're likely to see anywhere. Thank you again to the Allegheny Foundation. And I think that's it for this week. Have a wonderful week. See you next week, I hope. Thank you, Philomena. Bye now.